All right, everyone, welcome back to the School of Breath Science conversation. We're going to be talking about the biochemical element of breathing, the dysfunctions around that. That is going to consider the movement of gas in and out of the alveoli. We'll call that gas exchange, looking at the ratio of CO2 and oxygen, acid-base balance, and the impacts that when this element of our functional breathing becomes perturbed, we can start to show particular behaviors that you might not connect the dots together. So when we breathe, obviously air is moving into our nose, our mouth, preferably the nose. We'll have a conversation about that another time. However, it's going to go into our trachea, our bronchi, bronchioles, and into alveoli. Now, these alveoli are spherical like shapes that are just all around our lungs, and they're very, very, very thin. In fact, they're one cell thick, so that oxygen can kind of trickle across and CO2 can move back into them. And that movement of gas essentially goes from a higher pressure to a lower pressure through a transfer called diffusion. That, in essence, is what's allowing us to stay alive. The oxygen is then picked up by the red blood cells, particularly the hemoglobin, carried in the iron, and that will then go around our body to the working muscles. And down at the working muscles, there is a bit of a relationship where there is a higher level of CO2. The CO2 then enters into the red blood cell itself. Now, CO2 is a very dissolvable gas, so that it actually dissolves into the plasma in the red blood cell, and that will go through a chemical makeup relationship to create acidity in our cell, in our red blood cell. Now, when the red blood cell becomes acidic, the oxygen then actually leaves. So this relationship between carbon dioxide and oxygen is necessary to allow for oxygen delivery to occur, so working muscles in the brain can actually receive the oxygen. CO2 is not just a waste gas. It is necessary for survival. However, CO2, obviously at the level of the lung, is in a higher concentration than to the atmosphere, so it transfers back out and we breathe that back out again. We can change the acidity of our whole body simply by breathing faster or holding our breath. Because that carbon dioxide, because it's so dissolvable, the changes of the acidity at our breathing, which is one of the primary purposes why I breathe, is to ensure that we are remaining an acid-base balance between 7.35 and 7.45. That changes almost imminently when we shift our breathing consciously. Say, for example, we hyperventilate, or if we hold our breath for a long period of time. So what happens when this becomes a problem? Now, let's say someone is anxious or stressed. There is a period in the world where anxiety raises massively all of a sudden. Maybe a pandemic, something along those lines. I don't know if one of them's happened recently. There might be a particular group of people, those who are anxious, those who are on the edge of burnout, who are already susceptible to over-breathing as it is. Now, we add stress on top of that, that is going to increase breathing frequency, and those individuals may start to over-breathe. We term that hyperventilation. CO2 will start to drop, and that causes what we call an alkalotic change in our body, a respiratory alkalosis. Then we have individuals who actually get sick with a virus, and that virus then, because of the sickness, adds further stress to the system, and because it's a respiratory illness, the people will overbreathe even further. Now, if that happens, and it continues to happen for a period of maybe 4, 5, 6 days, what can happen is the kidneys will start to compensate and to bring the pH back into a normal range again. And all of a sudden we have what's called a compensated alkalotic state, or a compensated acid-base balance state, really. I'm not going to dig too much into what that means because we're getting into the weeds a bit. However, what this does is it will alter the fixed position of how someone's breathing. So they have to continue to overbreathe to maintain now their pH in a normal range. So now they have a dysfunction, and this dysfunction can be called chronic hyperventilation syndrome. Now, this is where it can get interesting, because to have things like chronic hyperventilation, to sit still and to sit around and relax can be quite challenging, because it's almost like the breathing is driving you. It's driving a higher arousal state. And when people start to relax and their breathing starts to calm down, because of a compensated mechanism within the body, they have a lack of bicarbonate, which is your buffering capacity. And they may start to go a little bit more towards the acidic side. Now, that can feel like a little bit of anxiety. So quickly, the brain may learn coping mechanisms to figure out what that is. If this happens often, we might present with personality disorders, maybe type A personality disorders, exercise addiction, not being able to sit still, being fidgety, being very, very fast and erratic, or just anxious. And some of these symptoms might not show up as symptoms such as breathlessness. They might show up as 1 minute fatigued, 1 minute feeling like you need to be running around all the time, but you have a lack of energy, i.e. looking on the edge of burnout again. Now, it seems as though a lot of the literature is suggesting that long COVID is probably one of the reasons, well, this concept is one of the reasons why a lot of people have long COVID. It looks like a metabolic acidosis, but for me, I think that is a downstream effect of a chronic respiratory alkalosis that is becoming compensated, and there's a reduction of buffering capacity because of the reduction of bicarbonate. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds of how to fix this, because that requires to work with an individual. And to work with an individual, we need to look at, number 1, their carbon dioxide levels, number 2, their air hunger sensitivities, number 3, their current behaviors, and number 4, a lot of other psychological factors and obviously clinical factors that are involved in that. However, this biochemical element of our breathing has a huge relationship on our psychological or psychophysiological component of our breathing, as well as the biomechanical component of our breathing. And all 3 of these are the 3 dimensions of functional breathing. And we have to consider them all to ensure that someone has a healthy breathing pattern. This is what I help people understand on the Breath Science certification. It is a 6-month training program where we go in depth to look at people of where they're currently at, what are their current needs, what are their goals, and how do we transition them from problem solution over 2, 3, 6 months period, depending on the severity of their issues. So all of this is discussed on there. And if you want to check that sort of training out, go head up on www.breathscience.com.au. So biochemistry, when it comes to breathing, is really looking at the ratio and gas exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, which has an impact on our acidity in our body. And that acidity on our body can have an impact on our breathing. And if it's not breathing, if it's not maintained or stabilized, then our kidneys can back up a bit of an issue here, and that can cause a long-term dysfunction, which can have behavioral shifts on an individual because of the impact that it has on our psychology. A lot of this can go unmissed. So therefore, if you know people who are type A, on the edge of burnout, pushing themselves all the time, but often getting sick or feeling symptoms or noticing somatic issues in their body, or ignoring them, but they then have things like sleep apnea at nighttime or long-term fatigue, and they're going through waves of good energy and bad energy, might be worth having them assessed for their breathing. Hope you enjoyed the episode. We're going to continue down this path of looking at the different dimensions of not only breathing, but also sleep, etc. And just go through the modules of the Breath Science certification to give you a little bit of a foundation of some of the information provided. Catch you next time.